Thank you for logging into the first of our webinar series for private landlords on the topic of tenement maintenance and management. I'm Annie Flint and I'm one of the co-authors of the Under One Roof website. We'll be joined later on by my other co-author, John Gilbert. I tend to deal with the management side of things and John tends to deal with the technical aspects of tenement maintenance. We'll be running these webinars on a weekly basis and we'll be covering topics, the kind of things that are coming to our inbox, so trying to answer some of the regular questions that we get from owners such as yourselves. We'll send you a link to each webinar 2 or 3 days before each event, and if you can't make the live event, just use that link to view the recording afterwards. Before we go any further, I would just like to say thank you to the Safe Deposit Scotland Charitable Trust who have been funding this webinar series. We are very grateful for their continuing support, both moral and financial. So today's webinar is on the topic of where to start if you don't have a factor. And the idea from this webinar came from a letting agent who contacted us saying that they'd just taken over a property from a landlord and the property didn't have a factor and the roof had started leaking. Where did they start? And of course that's one of those seemingly simple sounding questions that actually has a very complicated answer to it. And what I'm going to do is just try and take you through what that answer would be. It's going to be a mental map of the process. It's going to be a quick romp through the whole thing. But you'll find that we'll be covering a lot of the topics that I'm talking about in much more detail later on in the webinar series. So this here is my mental map of the process, and you can see that there are quite a few steps in it that you're going to need to go through to get your repair carried out effectively. First of all, you're going to have to work out whether this is a common repair. A common repair is the one that all owners pay for. Then you're going to have to find all those owners, and then you're going to need to check what your legal responsibilities are, just what share you might have to pay, for instance. You'll then need to find out how to get a builder to get a good repair job done, and then how to get owners to pay in so that you're all paying your share as you should. And I'm going to end up talking very briefly about what to do if, sadly, some owners won't join in on those common repairs. Hopefully that's not a situation you'll face. Let's start off by looking at whether it's an individual, common or mutual repair. Now, on the website, you'll find there are pages which set out all of these things, and common repairs are those which are to the main structure of the building. They're to the roof or the walls or the beams which are connecting those two walls together. This diagram shows you the individual repairs. Now, individual repairs tend to be those which are to the inside of your flat, but it can include the windows. And again, I'll just refer you to Under One Roof, and there'll be a link to the web page there which will tell you exactly where the lines are drawn between the individual and the common repairs. Now, there's another element of repairs that you need to look at, and these are mutual repairs. And mutual repairs are those parts of your block that only serve some flats in the building. So if you look at this picture of a fairly typical tenement, if your title deeds don't say anything about it, then the tenements on one side of the flat tend to pay for repairs to the chimneys and the downpipes that are on that side. In this case, the blue flats will be paying for the repairs to the chimney on the right side, and the flats on the red side of the tenement will be paying for the downpipes and the chimneys on the other side of the tenement. But there is a special case, and that is the case of main door flats. Now, I've shown you here a converted building with a basement flat. The situation here is exactly the same as if it were a main door flat. And here there is a basement flat that doesn't have any access to the stairs. So generally speaking, such a flat won't pay for repairs or decoration to the stairs and the close. So in this circumstance, the stair and the close can also be a mutual repair, but in most cases those repairs are common. Now, once you've established whether your repair is a common repair, and if it's a leak to the roof, which is the example we're going to use, it's almost certainly a common repair, and you're going to have to contact all of the owners. Now, as you're going around contacting owners, you may find that the tenement actually has an established routine for carrying out repairs, and you've come in as a new owner and you're maybe not aware of these things. But some tenements may already have an owners association and a bank account. They may also have a tradesperson who they use on a regular basis, who they trust and who knows the tenement. So try and ask around and find out if there's an established routine. But if there isn't, then you're going to have to contact all of those owners. Now, locating your co-owners can sometimes be a little bit tricky, and you're going to have to go through quite a few steps to try and find them all, because the chances are, in most tenements, there will be a number of owners who don't actually live there. There'll be a number who you can find by just ringing the doorbells. But otherwise, you're going to have to look at the landlord's register, and that's a register that you'll know well because you are or should be on that register. But then if a flat's empty, for instance, or the owners are away, you may need to go to the land register. And this is, the registers of Scotland, and it's where all your title deeds are. The title deeds are now known as land certificates. And by doing a search there, you'll be able to contact, or you'll be able to find out anyway, the name of the owner and the address that they were at when they purchased the property. You may also be able to find out other properties which they own, because one of those other properties could be where they actually live just now. If you're really struggling there, then some local authorities will try and get a message to those co-owners via the council tax register. But at the moment, because of data restrictions, they aren't allowed to actually tell you who those owners are. For an empty home, you might also be able to get help from your empty homes officer. And in further webinars, we're actually going to have people from the Registrars of Scotland and an empty homes officer who will be able to tell you about how they work and give you more detail about using the resources they have available. If you have a shop in your building, then you may be able to find the owner through the Scottish assessors. This is the kind of council tax register for businesses. Once you've got a name, if you're struggling to find an address, you may need to think about searching online for that person's name. Maybe they've got a Facebook page, and if you get really desperate, you can use a sheriff officer or a private detective to try and find that person. And as with all of these things, you'll find a page on Under One Roof that is dedicated to dealing with this topic in much more detail. So once you've found that owner, you've then got to make contact with them. And you may find when you've gone to your title deeds, it will say that you need to send a letter or whatever. But the Tenements Act now says that you can contact owners in whatever way seems reasonable. Apart from sending letters, including to the letting agent, you could email them, you could get them through Facebook or Zoom or WhatsApp. And if you really cannot find them and it's an empty property, then you can post a letter through the letterbox addressed to the owner. And in those circumstances, we suggest that you get somebody else to witness that you have actually served that letter and that notice in that way. But whenever you contact people, keep records, whether it's photos, screenshots, copies of letters. You may just need to come back to these at some point. So I've already mentioned your land certificate, known as your title deed. Now, this is the document which tells you what your responsibilities are. It will tell you what owners have to deal with, what's common, what's individual. It will also tell you how you should go about decision making and voting, and what share of repairs each owner should pay. Now, generally speaking, these title deeds follow the provisions set out in the Tenements Scotland Act. And it's the Tenements Scotland Act that I'm going to use as the main reference point here. And it's the fallback position, it's the main position, unless your title deeds say otherwise. So in the Tenements Scotland Act, you're looking for the Tenement Management Scheme. And again, like everything else, there are pages on one roof, under one roof. And as I said, the Tenements Act steps in where the title deeds say nothing or where they're unworkable. And this can happen, for instance, in properties which have been converted where the shares don't add up to 100%. But if your title deeds say that shares are by rateable value, then you do need to use that, even though it's a figure from 1914, but you can actually find those figures. It is deemed to be workable, but it may not be if flats have been divided or enlarged or otherwise changed around. Now, the Tenements Act does give some other additional responsibilities. I'm going to mention the duty to maintain later on, very useful. And the other thing you ought to be aware of, and it is really critical in case there's a fire in your building, and there have been a number of tenement fires recently where some owners have not been insured and people have not been able to rebuild, but owners are required by law to have insurance for the reinstatement of the common parts of their building. And you can ask owners for evidence that they have that insurance, and I really strongly suggest that you do. Some of the other useful provisions of the Tenements Act are that owners remain responsible for repairs even if they sell their property halfway through, and we'll come across one of the notices that helps you implement that later on. And the other thing is that properly made decisions are binding on those who didn't agree. So if you make a decision, it's a majority decision, one or two owners don't agree, they are still bound by what the rest of you owners have said. And there's a page under one roof, as ever, that tells you where you can find your title deeds. Now, when it comes to making decisions, if you're talking about maintenance, then it's a majority decision. So if you're the classic tenement with 8 flats, 4 on one side, 4 on the other, then if 6 owners vote for repair, that decision is a majority and it's binding on the other 2 who didn't agree. But there is a problem. If 4 owners say yes and 4 say no, that is an impasse. It's a tied vote and it's a definite deficiency in the legislation. If you're talking about an improvement, then you need every single owner to agree. You need 100% majority for improvements. So what's maintenance and what's an improvement? Well, maintenance is its repairs, it's cleaning, gardening, it's other routine works. It even includes the day-to-day running of the tenement or using a factor, and it can include quite big work such as the reinstatement of part but not most of a tenement building. However, some things are set out in the Tenements Act as not being improvements, and one of those is installing door entry systems. Another thing is adding insulation. That was added by the Climate Change Act. And you also need to look out for what are called incidental improvements. So suppose you're replacing your closed front door and you decide you're going to get a better front door because the old one was just not up to the job. That is an incidental improvement and it counts as maintenance. You only need a majority of owners to agree to it. So how do you call people together to make that kind of decision? Well, the first thing is give people enough notice that they can actually be there. The law says you should give a legal minimum of 48 hours. Tell people the reason that you're going to have the meeting so they can get prepared for it and check out how they feel. They can maybe consult other people, check their bank balance, find out what's gone on in the past. And then get people together for a meeting. And these days, an online meeting may be the best means. Get people online via Skype or Zoom or FaceTime, whatever. But bring people together as best you can. And if you can't get them online, or you obviously can't get them in a room at the moment because of the COVID restrictions, then you can also take a poll of owners in writing. You could even telephone people if you can get them. And just ask them to respond to you. Now, once you've made a decision, make sure everyone knows what decision you have made. So follow it up to everyone, whether they're at the meeting or not, just confirming what you've agreed. And you need to allow people 28 days to appeal. It doesn't happen that often, but you do need to make an allowance for that. So at this stage here, you're at the stage where you're actually going to go and start finding a contractor. And just now, I'd like to bring in my co-author, John. At this point in the webinar today, I'd like to bring in my co-author, John Gilbert. Now, John's a conservation architect, and I think John has commissioned more repairs than he really wants to even to think about, let alone actually count. John, we're in a situation where we're hypothesizing that we have a landlord who's just found a leak and they don't have a factor, and the leak's in the roof. What do they do?
It's likely they'll have to follow the CDM regulations. That's the Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. And this places a duty on the client, which is basically you or maybe your representative, to organize things to ensure that safety on site is maintained and that things are done as safely as possible.
Right, and this is because landlords are in this particular position about being a non-domestic client, and this is something that we're going to look at in next week's webinar, and we're going to go into some detail about it. So that's the first thing that landlords need to think about, is these construction design management rules that say that they really need to use professional help. But we do advise people to get professional help for lots of different reasons, don't we, John? I mean, are there other good reasons why people should get a professional?
I think if it's a fairly reasonably big job, then yes, you definitely should get a professional help. That the professional will advise you about the CDM regulations as well, and help you prepare the pre-contract safety plan, and really advise on those sorts of matters. But I think if it's over £5,000, then you definitely need a professional. But you can do things to some degree, if it's a very simple matter yourself, or at least as the main client.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if it's a small repair, and we're getting into these problems about the construction design management regulations, I think what landlords could do is get their co-owners who aren't landlords to actually take responsibility for commissioning the repair, but give them a lot of help.
Yes.
And so let's just suppose this is what the landlord would do, that they're going to give their co-owners some help in commissioning contractors. So let's take it on that kind of basis, and it's a small-ish repair. Do they need to get competitive quotes, first of all?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure, if you get an initial, you don't have to get competitive quotes. No, you can go to somebody you trust to get you a quote, first of all. And usually that's what I would recommend, particularly if it's a small job. Actually, it's great if you are a tenement owner, to know somebody who you can trust to call in if you've got a defect. I mean, if you're using somebody like the Trusted Trader Scheme or somebody in the Roofing Contractors Association, then, well, that's fair and good. That's great. Having a professional tradesman who knows their stuff has a great lot of advantages, because they'll probably know other tradespeople who can also help. So if you have some lead work to be done, they might know a good lead worker as well. So having the trusted person, I think, is key to it. And after that, you can decide if you want to accept that quote, or decide you want competitive quotes. Now, you could use the basis of that description of work for the small repair, and then ask another contractor who, again, you think is a good contractor, or somebody else has recommended them, to give you a quote for that scale of work. You want to make sure you're asking the next contractor to do exactly the same thing as the first contractor. That's the key to it.
Okay, so what you're saying is, get a good contractor first of all. So find somebody who's in a trades association or a trusted trader, or who's recommended by another trades firm who you respect. Get them to put it in writing, and if you need a second quote because the other owners have asked you to get a second quote, then get the second contractor to price on doing exactly the same kind of work. And that's the best way to get good quotes put in front of people. Is there anything else in terms of the paperwork that people need to be concerned about in trying to find a good tradesperson?
But I think you want to make sure the contractor has insurances for the work, and that you also have notified your insurers that the work is going to proceed. So those two things are also important.
Yeah, I think people have found out that not having those things, it can be fatal, can't it? I mean, we both know of cases where tenements have gone on fire. We think it may have been a roofer at work previously, and they're in a real mess about insurance and, you know, the big query about whether those tenements are ever going to be rebuilt. You know,
Yes.
people have lost their homes effectively, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Once people have found a contractor, John, is the contractor going to always stick to the price that is given in the quotation? I mean, what happens if the builder finds other work, you know?
The builder will always find other work because things are hidden. And that's why you should always include a contingency in the price. You don't have to tell the contractor what the contingency is, although there's no harm in that. But usually we would recommend maybe 5 or 10% of the budget should be held as a contingency. So it's used if the contractor does find something.
I suppose the final thing in this sort of doing it themselves bit is how much do they need to put in writing with the tradesperson?
Everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, things can be assumed, and if they're assumed, there's a risk. So don't assume anything. Put it in writing.
Okay, yeah, and we do have some guidance on Under One Roof about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, John, that was very helpful. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be picking up on all of these things in future webinars. But we'll look forward to seeing you back at the Q&A.
Yeah, great. Look forward to that. Okay, Annie.
Supposing that you have agreement from people, then what you need to do is to get each owner to pay their share into the common bank account before you sign the contract. If you don't have a common bank account, you can ask owners to put their share aside into a separate account of their own. And if it's a small repair, not a very high cost, they may be willing to give you the money in advance of you commissioning the tradesperson. And that is really useful if it seems reasonable for owners to do that. However, if it's a large sum of money and that doesn't seem reasonable, or owners won't, then what you have to do is get the tradesperson to carry out the work. When they've finished, pay the tradesperson within the promised time scale, even if other owners haven't paid you at that point. It is a risk area for owners who organise repairs, and it's one of the reasons why it's so good to have a factor. However, what do you do if owners won't agree to pay their share of repairs? This is the situation that every owner dreads in trying to get things carried out, but there are ways of going through it. And we're going to start off with things you can do yourself to work with your co-owners. And again, this is something we're going to pick up in one of our upcoming webinars, where we're going to have a solicitor and someone from the Scottish Mediation Service who are going to talk to you about ways that you can deal with owners. And we're also going to have a seminar on difficult conversations, the kind of things you might need to have with owners who are being rather reluctant about things. So the first thing that we do say to you is, don't just let things slide because one or two owners won't agree. What's going to happen if you do that is that the repair situation is just going to get worse, and it's going to get more expensive all the way around. This is definitely not in any owner's interest, not even in the interest of those who won't agree. But if you follow proper procedures, the law will be on your side. And I know it's difficult, but you can almost always get blood out of a stone. It can take a long time. So one of the first things you need to sort out is whether these owners who aren't agreeing can't pay or won't pay. Now, in my experience, the can't pay owners may just ignore the problem, putting letters, in a drawer or something like that, or they may quibble about costs. And what I suggest you do is, if you think you've got owners who may not be able to afford to pay, is just advise everyone to get financial help and financial advice. Now, there are pages on Under One Roof. People can also be referred to Citizens Advice or Money Advice Scotland for help in raising money. And if you're talking about a substantial repair, thousands and thousands of pounds, then some older owners may be able to release cash from their property through equity release. And in situations like that, we do advise that people definitely get independent financial advice on the way forward. But it's always worth telling owners that these things exist and trying to help them through in a tactful kind of way, how they can raise money to carry out an essential repair, because it will be in their long-term financial interests to do so. Now, I mentioned the duty to maintain earlier on, and this is Section 8 of the Tenements Scotland Act. And what it says is that owners have a duty to maintain their property so as to provide support and shelter. So support and shelter covers an awful lot of things, such as the leak in your roof, or perhaps a problem with the walls. And it doesn't just apply to common repairs either. It could be that there's an individual repair that an owner's due to carry out, perhaps to the window, that is causing problems to other people. However, support and shelter doesn't include health and safety. And that again is another deficiency in the legislation. But duty to maintain does mean that one owner can carry out the work as appropriate and recover the costs from other owners, even if there is no majority agreement. So if you've got an essential repair, this may be the way forward, and we'll talk about recovering costs in a few minutes. Now, I also mentioned earlier on a provision to make sure that owners who were selling their property while you've got a repair underway could be kept on board. And this is called the Notice of Potential Liability for Costs. And the point of this is that it's a notice that's served and goes with the title deed. And it means that anyone coming into a property or buying a flat there realises that there is a repair underway and that there are consequences. And it allows that owner's legal representatives to open up the issue with the person who's trying to sell. And the financial adjustment can be made to the price of the property so that the new owner takes over the responsibility for the repair. And that allows you to keep going with the repair. You're not trying to chase money from an owner who's moved away somewhere. You don't need a court order to serve this notice, so it's one that some people have started to use as a bit of a frightener to persuade owners to pay up, because it does show on the title deeds, but it can be difficult to lodge, and you may need to get help from a solicitor or conveyancer. But this is one of the things we'll be talking to Registers of Scotland about it in a future webinar. Now, if you don't get anywhere with those ways of doing things, you may need to go to your local council. Now, they seldom have grants available these days. You may be lucky, but it's not that common. Council staff are willing to help with advice, and many councils will also offer what they call missing shares. Now, missing shares are one of the best things around, actually, because if you've gone through all the correct procedures, we tell you what those are on the website, and local councils will also tell you as well what they expect you to do. The council will serve what they call a missing shares notice, where you've got a majority of owners agreeing. Now, the missing shares notice actually tells those owners who aren't going to pay that if they don't, they could incur pretty hefty interest charges. So the council will pay their share, but the council will then recover that money from the owners who haven't paid. Now, the current interest rate is 8% on those missing shares, and they add admin charges. That can be a substantial sum of money. And what tends to happen is that owners think, well, they might just as well pay up and get on with it because it's cheaper. So I really do recommend, if you're struggling and you've gone through all those other routes that we've mentioned, try your counsel for missing shares. It really is very helpful. The page you're looking for on Under One Roof that goes through all of this is Enforcing Repairs Yourself, and that will lead you on to how the council enforces repairs. Now, if everything's gone well and you've got all your owners to agree by one means or the other, what you want owners to do is to pay their share into an account, preferably your common bank account, and then you proceed with the building work. However, if owners won't pay in, you may need to go through a whole cost recovery and use court action for that. And this is what you need to do. You need to check, first of all, that you've followed all the proper procedures. This will keep you right. It will make you totally certain of your position when you end up in court with this owner. You then carry out the repair and you pay the contractor, and you send the bill to the owner for their share as set out in the titles. And then if they don't pay, you send a reminder with a warning that you're going to take action to recover costs. Now, don't make this an empty threat. If you say you're going to go ahead and do it, do it. And I have met owners who tell me that they've done this. They have followed the pages on Under One Roof, word by word, letter by letter, and they've recovered their costs, and they've represented themselves all the way through this process. And what they've used is a procedure which is called simple procedures, and this replaced the small claims procedure as it was known previously. And this is for claims under £5,000. So if you've got 8 owners in a tenement, £5,000 each, that's £40,000 of a repair. That is quite a big repair that you can deal with yourself through using these simple procedures. You don't need legal help. You just need to be able to write something out clearly. And people like Citizens Advice or maybe other of your friends will help you go through the material so that you can gather together your case. And of course, you've kept all the copies of all the letters that you've sent out, copies of all the quotes. You've got a totally clear path that shows that you've followed all the proper procedures. And so you'll go through the simple procedures. It's a fairly informal process compared with most courts. You'll find yourself sitting round a table dealing with this in many cases. And once you've got a judgment against these owners, you then need to follow that up. And this may mean actually serving a notice through sheriff officers, or even putting a charge on the title deeds. And putting a charge on the title deeds is the way you get blood out of a stone, actually, because what it means is that you may have to wait some time until an owner sells, but once they do, some of the money from the sale value of the property gets paid to you to cover your costs, and it can include interest as well. So I think when I start on this, it started off being that kind of simple question, but this is exactly what you should be doing, is starting here. And here is having a proper system of management for your tenement. It's having an owners association. It's having that communal repair fund and the bank account, and it's going through routine inspections. And these are future steps that we recommend everyone take. So owners associations allow you to exert some leadership over what's going on. It allows you to bring owners together and start to agree on steps forward, and it aids communication, and it spreads the load of trying to organise repairs, so it's not always the one person doing every single job. And when it comes to paying for repairs, we really do suggest that people start saving and budgeting. One of the big issues for people on a low income is having to pay for a big cost out of nowhere. However, it's often much easier for people to set aside a small sum on a regular basis that will gradually build up into something that will cover some of these routine repairs which are coming up. So we do encourage people to get their co-owners to start saving. And the best way to save is to have a building reserve fund. However, that does tend to need you to change your title deeds, because it's a kind of a saving scheme like a pension for the building, and you've got to get this written into the titles. But the second best thing, and still very useful, is to have a building maintenance fund set up as a kind of a joint account. And although it can be quite tricky to get such accounts set up, it is possible. Some of the things that make it tricky are the money laundering regulations and the fact that the law says that you ought to have an interest-bearing account, and no one's paying interest on anything at the moment. However, if you really can't do that, get everyone to save individually. Maybe even get people to start saving with a credit union, because credit unions will sometimes give people loans for essential expenditure, and that can be just so useful for people on a low income. And of course, there's a page on Under One Roof that deals with keeping accounts and carries all these details. And then the final thing we suggest is get your building surveyed on a regular basis, at least every 5 years. Now, I know this sounds like a big task, but it really is worthwhile. And if it's going to cost you £1,500 to get your building surveyed, well, look, between 8 owners, every 5 years, that works out at £45 a year. You know, that's less than £1 a week. And what that gives you is a professional survey that will tell you what you need to prioritise. You may find that your building needs far less work than you actually think it needs or fear it needs. But a surveyor will be able to prioritise for you and tell you what's the most important thing to carry out and what you need to start saving for. And it really is worthwhile getting a programme of repairs put together, because, you know, sometimes the cost of scaffolding can just outweigh the cost of a repair. I was talking to one builder recently who was telling me that for putting scaffolding up just half a building, you could be paying £6,000 to get the scaffolding put up and taken down. It's only £150 each week to keep it up there. I mean, against that cost, what's £150 to add on to getting 2 or 3 more repairs carried out? It just will save you money in the long run to get a professional survey carried out. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm sure we've left you with lots of questions. I'm sure you've been typing them in on the Q&A. And now I'm going to be joined by John Gilbert again, and we're going to see what we can do to answer those questions of yours. So let's just get John back on the line. Have been building up, and thank you very much for those. I'm just waiting for John to come in. And
can you hear me, Annie?
Yes, we've got you there. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So some of the questions that we had coming in, the first one was about finding good communal bank accounts, and this is one that all of you answered for us. So thank you very much. But the problems that people do tend to come across are firstly the money laundering regulations, where you have to go through so many hoops to prove that you are who you are and where your cash is coming from. And the other one that tends to come up as an issue is that the law says these should be interest-bearing accounts, and no one's paying interest anywhere at the moment. I know if you live in Edinburgh, the council there says any joint account is fine. I know other people query that, but as long as the account you have is capable of bearing interest at some point, that should meet the requirements of the law. So I hope that's answered that. And you'll see people are saying Santander do these things. I'm just trying to set one up with a co-op at the moment, but that's for a different purpose. That's a treasurer's account. And other people have said the Royal Bank is allowing them to do things online. So that was the first question that we had there. And keep adding more questions, please, or upvoting those. Second question we had was from William, and that was one about emergency repairs, i.e. your gutters are leaking into the property. How do you deal with emergencies? Well, the regulations say that if it's an emergency, you can bypass the normal procedures if you have to. Now, that depends on how much of an emergency something is, and also how much you need to kind of bypass the procedures. If you can get hold of the majority of owners easily, tell them what's going on, get their agreement, then you can just go and get that repair done as quickly as you need. If you can't get hold of all the other owners, though, then what you can do is step in, commission the repair yourself, and once it's completed, you send the bill to all the other owners, telling them what their share is and saying that you had to deal with this as a matter of urgency. So there is provision there. And the duty to maintain sort of helps you with this as well, because you sometimes find people just won't agree to something. You just cannot get hold of them. And as I said in the earlier presentation, with the duty to maintain, as long as it's a problem about support and shelter, then you can go ahead and commission the repair without going through all the procedures. But again, it's like the emergency situation. You're going to have to pay up for that repair first of all, probably, and then try and recover the money from your co-owners later on. So people do tend to be reluctant to do that, but sometimes you really can save yourself quite a lot of money in actually getting something done sooner rather than later. And you may very well need to go and take your co-owners to court, which, as I say, no one wants to do, but I have known owners who tell me that they have done this. They've gone through the pages on Under One Roof, word for word. They've downloaded every letter. They've sent off, all the forms. They've got the judgment against somebody. They've then enforced it. But what they did say was because they could only deal with it on a kind of emergency basis, by the time that owner who they had to take action against had come and paid for the repair, the person who'd taken them to court was able to point to the next leak in the roof that needed done. So this comes back to John's point about trying to get a good repair done first time round rather than continual patches. But we do know about the difficulties in doing all of that. John, have you got any comments about?
Well, just if it's an emergency, it might well be a blocked gutter, that sort of thing. Particularly in parapet roofs, these block quite regularly. And sometimes they don't have enough outlets or downpipes. Sometimes they don't have any overflows. So you have to make sure they're clear. And it's usually easy enough to get a parapet gutter cleared. It's more difficult to get a straightforward cast iron gutter cleared because you might need a cherry picker. If you're at the front, you can usually get a cherry picker. But if it's at the back, well, no. That'd be really difficult. You might need scaffolding. So that might become a bigger job. It's not so easy to clean a back gutter. But usually back gutters, well, they overflow. You have to check, have you got enough downpipes there? Is the capacity of the downpipe sufficient to take the increasing amount of water that we're getting on our roofs away? And it's a common problem, and it's getting increasingly a common problem.
Thanks, John. We've now got a couple of questions about partly about how you kind of get your co-owners together into monthly maintenance and kind of regular arrangements for doing things. So I'm not sure if Callum, I typed it in, or Colin, that Petra's behind the scenes, by the way, dealing with all the technical things, trying to keep us all going very smoothly, which I think so far we have done. Quite a miracle. But the question was, I run a committee for a block of flats. 6 flats, 4 of the flats pay the £15 monthly maintenance fee, but 2 won't pay monthly, but did pay a recent invoice by lump sum. Can they be forced to pay monthly? I think the answer to that is no. It's annoying when people don't, but if they are paying up when requested, then they are doing their duty according to the tenement legislation and probably also to your title deeds. If you've got an owners association of the form that the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group has been saying you should have an owners association, it would be a different matter. And that's kind of why one of the things we've been pushing is for that new legislation to go through. And that legislation will cover a requirement to have owners associations that would be a legal entity in their own right. So individual owners wouldn't have to take responsibility for carrying out repairs. It would be the owners association. And we're also recommending that people should carry out regular property inspections every 5 years. And also that people should have building reserve funds. And if we had those, I think that would answer so many of these points which you're all putting to us.
Mm-hmm.
Jim asked on a kind of related question here that he's one of 8 landlords in a stair where even getting small amounts of money for repairs has been difficult, but a majority are supportive of appointing a factor. Do we have a mandate for doing this? Well, as I said to you, maintenance covers not just carrying out repairs, but also the general management of the tenement. And management includes appointing a factor. So in theory, if a majority of you agree that you want to use a factor, then the minority have to go along with that. However, some factors may be reluctant to take on a property where they're concerned that they will have owners who are going to be difficult. So by all means, go and speak to a factor if you've got that majority vote, and just keep trying to bring those other owners on board and see if the factor has got ideas about how to bring those owners on board to get things done. Right, what else have we got? We've got a question here. Someone who is a landlord in Edinburgh with a buy-to-let flat and a tenement in Dundee, where the front entrance door keeps being damaged. He's previously replaced the front door handle. The agent has unsuccessfully tried to contact owners on the stair for putting a security door, but they can't get a majority. Can we claim it's an essential repair under health and safety? What do you think, John? Do you think that is a health and safety
I've
issue?
got a feeling that some of the doors in Dundee were original doors, in which case it would be maintenance. But yeah, I don't know. I have been to tenements in Dundee, and they have sort of double entrance doors, and they are original. So it depends if it's an original door, really.
Yeah, I think it probably is still a majority decision that's required. So I don't know if we've given you the answer that you wanted there, Michael, sadly. Okay, so John, here's one for both of us. Someone has got a blockage in the parapet, presumably that's the parapet gutter, and to clear it requires access through somebody else's flat. Presumably that's a kind of attic flat where somebody can crawl out a window and clear the blockage. But they're having trouble trying to get access through that property. Any advice to avoid a recurrence? John, is there a physical solution to this? And I'll try and think of the management solution.
Well, I suppose you could get a cherry picker to get up there, and the cost would be a lot higher. So that owner would have to pay more of a cost, as all of the owners would have to pay a higher cost. So I don't know any way of getting around the fact that the owner doesn't want somebody in their flat. maybe you have to say, well, we'll put protective sheeting down or do something that, why is it that they don't want somebody through? Is it because there's somebody in the bedroom and who's sleeping, and, well, maybe we have to make some conditions for anybody coming in? Usually it only takes a few minutes to actually clear a blockage. So it's not the sort of job that is complex, or it doesn't, not usually anyway.
Yes, I think both tenancy agreements and the Tenements Act say that people do need to allow access for essential repairs. Mm-hmm. I think you do just need to persist in that, actually. I think if you remember the Scottish Association of Landlords, they are very good at giving advice to landlords about how they can deal with things like this. They do seem to be a very good organisation for landlords. Certainly very helpful to us in communicating with landlords and helping them out doing things. So that would be a route I suggest for trying to get help in dealing with your tenants. Okay, here we've got another question, and this is Suzanne asking, what she says is she pays her share for maintenance and building insurance, but the person in charge in the close doesn't communicate with her. She doesn't live in the flat, and it's the only one in the close that's let. What can she do to persuade the owner in charge to communicate with her? And she says she hasn't been able to get a copy of the insurance either. Yes, there are a lot of owners who are very prejudiced against landlords. They kind of make the immediate assumption that a private landlord is not interested in carrying out repairs. And I think it's a sad situation.
It's usually the reverse, actually.
Well, that is absolutely true, John. I think the problem is often more. You have one where you have owners who can't afford to carry out repairs, who just ignore what's going on. And I think most landlords are very sensible about things, and they're very willing to bring their expertise to help.
Well, I think landlords tend to be a bit more professional anyway, so that counts.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps, Suzanne, what you could do is just maybe contact the person in charge of your building there and say that you've seen there's this very helpful set of webinars, and that they might like to tune into them. You'll get the link. And we'll also be putting it on YouTube. So just watch out for those links coming up. Send him the link and see if that helps to persuade him that, you're on the side of the angels. You are trying to get things done. As for getting copies of the insurance, this is one of the things I'm going to pick up at a future webinar where, well, there's a couple of webinars coming up where we'll deal with this, actually. One is going to be on the enforcing repairs situation, and we're going to be talking about how you can use simple procedures. And it's a question I'm going to put to the solicitor who's going to be helping me out in that webinar, is how you use the simple procedures to deal with the kind of problems that you have where there isn't a sort of strict monetary problem. So, where you can't easily quantify the cost of something. So that is one to watch out for, I think. And I see Sybil's agreeing with us about this thing about landlords. I think we just have to keep pushing it. Yes. Now Liz has come in. I wonder if you can see this. I think, Liz, you're dealing with landlord registration, but she's saying that you can apply to the Housing and Property Chamber for Scotland in relation to getting access for essential repairs if your tenant is refusing access. So I've learned something today. Brilliant. Thank you, Liz. That's why I really enjoy doing these things, is that I do learn things from people. Sybil jumping in, yes, there's a lot of drift and delay on these things. Yes, I know there was a huge backlog with all the evictions and things like that when they get started off. But I think even if it's difficult to do these things first time round, second time round, then people realise that you are serious, and I think it does help. So try it, Sybil, please. Have we got any other questions that we've not yet answered? I'm just scrolling back up to the top. I think we did have a question about access to the common parts of the property. And I know this was one that someone sent me by email. And that was someone who has found that the back court of their property is taken up by other owners using it. One where an owner has constructed a ramp, and another where owners have put out large amounts of pots, and they're finding this makes it difficult for them to get access. I think the legal position is that everyone does have a right to share that back court, and unless it says something in your title deeds. And I did come across a case recently where one owner had always taken care of the back garden and had managed to get it written into the title deeds that they had sole access to that garden as a matter of right. And it's a complication, and something that comes out of one of the first bits of law that the Scottish Parliament put through, the Title Conditions Act. But there is a ruling that says that if you've allowed something to keep going for 5 years, then effectively it gets written into the title deeds. So that's one where, there may be a case that someone can argue that you can't get access to the back court. That is very rare, though. I think in the case of a ramp, if this is for somebody who needs it for access as they have a disability, I really don't think you can do anything about that at all. I think owners do have a right to access their properties, and I think you do have to accept that will happen. It should have been put in after consultation with all the other owners, and perhaps it happened, that was put in before you took over that property. But this is one of these questions, which is one of these difficult conversations, and that's something we're going to pick up in a future webinar as well, as just how to deal with some of these trickier
Can
things.
I say one thing, Annie, just about the close? It's important that the close is kept clear of items because there's a fire risk for escape. You've got to keep the close clear so people can easily get out. So no storage of materials in the close, please. Otherwise, the fire brigade would have a question that if there's any flammable material in the close, Sorry, Annie.
No, that is a very good point, actually. Again, it's one of those things that can be difficult to enforce, but I think in those cases, you could ask the local authority to help you with that if you can't get any response from your owners because of the safety issues there.
Most of the time it's people not helping with the garden, so if there's somebody there who's keen on the garden, that's great, but it varies, doesn't it? Sometimes they just take ownership because they cut the grass or something and they think, oh, well, that's my space. But no, it's not. It's a common shared space.
Okay. Okay, we've got a question. Someone saying they can't see a handout in the handouts tab. It's there. I'm not sure what's happening, Michael, but if you can't get it at all, just email me, will you? And I will send a copy to you directly. And that's the same for anybody else who can't get that handout. Can you just email me? Okay, so couple more questions coming up here. You're doing very well with keeping these questions going, folks. And if you don't mind, we'll keep going for a little bit longer. I think the system will allow us to. Someone has tried to point a factor for their block of 8 flats, but all the factors they've contacted saying they're not taking on new business. Can you suggest the best way to find a factor? Just keep trying. The Property Managers Association of Scotland, PMAS, they have a website. It might be worth contacting them and seeing if they are able to help you by suggesting who is in their area. And sometimes you may have a social landlord in the area who has a factoring function as well. And I think those associations are often members of PMAS. Otherwise, you just need to try contacting the local housing associations. And if they don't offer a factoring service themselves, they may be able to advise who does. If you're stuck with self-factoring, then do the thing which I say about an owners association, bank accounts, and get professional help where you need it. You know, that is one of the most important things. You know, as we said, when we're talking about getting contractors, you can't expect to do everything yourself. Get a professional when you need it. And then someone coming back in saying, can we ask owners to share the cost to maintain the back garden, which has been neglected for years? Yes, it's maintenance. Okay, so you just need a majority of you to agree. And hopefully you can actually make them pay up. But keep trying is what I say in all of these things here. Right. Okay, I think we'll just take one last question. I'm just trying to absorb this question myself, but I'll read it out and see if I've made sense of it by the time I get to the end of it. If there's an agreement to save £15 a month, but 2 flats don't pay this, and then one of them sells their flat in a year's time, are they due to pay the £15 a month times 12 for the maintenance fee?
Good question.
So no work was due in this time. Does this become a debt recoverable from the sale of their flat?
Should be.
Yes, I think it kind of depends what it's for. The problem with maintenance funds at the moment is that if somebody sells, they can ask you to pay back their share of something, and I think you are in fact obliged to repay that share. Now, sometimes owners are just keen to see, you know, the tenement continuing, and they've got a lot of goodwill, and they say, no, just keep it. It's not a problem. But I think you have to decide what that £15 a month is for. You know, if you've said to people it's against future repairs and you haven't had any repairs, then you might have to return it. If it's been a factor's fee where the factor has been there, even if the factor hasn't had to do anything and it is money you've expended, then you don't have to return it. It has in fact been expended, but it does sound like you might need to return that there. But do try and contact the new owner as soon as they move in and tell them about, you know, this maintenance account that you've got, and try and persuade this owner to tell incoming owners that you have this very good property arrangement, because it does in fact entice people to buy, because they know this is a block of flats where owners work together. So it's very positive.
I think, Annie, it's worth saying recurring that all tenements need maintenance. It doesn't matter if they're modern or 1910 or 1930 or 1950 or Victorian, they will always need to be maintained. And people have to understand that. So, you know, I think regular payments are what covers that. You're always going to have to do some maintenance at some stage. Nothing lasts forever.
Right. I've got someone saying they're having difficulty hearing us on one of the mics. Everything looks like it's working okay to me here. I don't know if Petra can see anything that's going on. I don't know if it's because we're starting to run over time on things, but maybe folk could just go on the chat and say if other people are having that problem, and Petra could pick up on this and let us know. Other questions keep coming in. One about common insurance, and that one factor charging a lot more than someone who managed to arrange it themselves. Upcoming webinar, the one we're doing with a couple of factors, we're also going to talk about common insurance as well, and talk about what leads to some of the differences in prices. But it may be that you're actually getting more from the factors insurance than you are through the other insurance that you've got. One for you, John. Are there any specialist companies for tenement maintenance, for instance, window suppliers?
Well, there are window suppliers. Is this a new window, replacement window, or just a sash repair? Or, you know, it depends what is the job, really. But there are some people who specialize in repairing sash and case windows, which is good value if you want the sills repaired. Then some people want to replace the window. You know, there's pros and cons between that. You obviously want a fairly draft-proof window, but there are a number of different companies out there, some of who have much more expertise than others. It depends if you're in Glasgow or Edinburgh or where you are. I mean, if you email Under One Roof, I'm sure we could respond with some suggestions.
Okay. Right, I'm going to take one last question, and before I get there, I've just checked the chat, and Petra has re-uploaded the handout, so have another shot at trying to get that, will you, while I'm taking that last question. And I think that's just a quick warning, get there quickly. But the question I've got is, what is the typical cost of setting up an owners association? Well, at the moment, a typical cost for a voluntary organisation is zero. You can go to our webpage on owners associations, and you'll find at the bottom of the page there is a download of a constitution, and you can use that constitution and adapt it. And as much as anything else, it's the negotiation and the discussion and the communication that you have with your co-owners about setting up the owners association that is useful. It's as much that as having the owners association itself, because I think you start to get people on board, you start to share what your common aims are, and having the owners association in the end can become just the formality. You know, you've started to get people all thinking on the same lines. So it costs absolutely nothing. If, on the other hand, you wanted to set up your owners association as a company, then everybody in the close would need to pay to have their title deeds changed so they could adopt what is currently called the Development Management Association that was set up by the Tenements Act 2004. And that can be expensive because you've all got to pay to get your title deeds changed. And sadly, it's a cost that just makes it beyond anybody thinking about it. So that's why we're fighting to try and get the government to introduce it on a compulsory basis, because it's not just that it makes it compulsory for owners to do it. It means you don't have to pay to change your title deeds. And it means that you don't have to consult your mortgage lenders. They have to agree because it's law. So if you want to do anything to try and sort of help in the future, do get hold of your MSP and say how much the things that the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group said were required are needed. You know, there are going to be a lot of people who come along and grumble about, you know, the cost of doing this or this, that, and the other. And I think MSPs are going to think, oh, this could be a bit risky. You know, I'm going to get a lot of flack from people. I think you've got to make sure they're going to get a lot of flack if they don't do it. So, yes, please do pick these things up with your MSPs and let them know that tenant management is difficult and they need to be doing something about it. So we've gone well over time. I see that most of you are still there. Thank you so much for bearing with us through all this time. And I bet you're all desperate to go and get a cup of tea, do something like that. I think John's remedy at this point is a gin and tonic, but
yeah, that's right, gin and tonic.
To be. I hope you've all managed to download the handout. If you haven't, do get in touch with us. And we have a webinar coming up next week. And that webinar is on the topic of how landlords differ from owner-occupiers. And this is going to cover the question about whether landlords are required to act as factors. Well, the answer now is no, but the Scottish Government is looking at that again. They've got a consultation out, and this will be your chance to put your vote in on that. We're also going to talk about the construction design management regulations, and we're also going to talk about the repairing standard and the links between that and common repairs, particularly the issue about what if your co-owners won't agree to carry out common repairs, and that's affecting your flat and the standard of the conditions that your tenants are experiencing. So thank you very much, all of you, and we look forward to seeing you all next week, I hope.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.
Goodbye.